Okay, thank you. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 30th meeting of the Criminal Justice Committee in 2025. We have no apologies this morning, and our first item of public business today is to continue consideration of our pre-budget scrutiny. So we have two witnesses, panels of witnesses today, and I intend to allow up to 60 minutes for each panel, and I refer members to papers 2 and 3. So I welcome to the meeting this morning Malcolm Graham, Chief Executive at Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, and John Logue, Crown Agent and Chief Executive, and Yvette Greener, Chief Operating Officer, Crown Office and Procurator, Fiscal Service. So warm welcome to you all, and thank you for submitting your very detailed written submissions. So as time is tight, I will move to questions and begin with a broad opening question just to get us started. And I'll maybe initially come to John Logue and then I'll come to Malcolm Graham. So, have you found funding in 2025-26 to be sufficient? And what are the main asks of your organisation for 2026 to 2027? And if you're unsuccessful in that, what would be the consequences? So, John Logue, first of all.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Committee. The funding for the current year was consistent with the very fair approach that the Government has taken to our funding requirements over the previous years, which I've spoken about before at the Committee. And that included additional funding for additional staff this year to deal with additional pressures that I spoke about last year, and so we were very grateful for that. It would be fair to say, however, that even with the additional funding came the requirement for very significant efficiency savings during the course of the year in order to live within the budget. And we are on track to achieve approximately £7 million of efficiency savings within the budget, despite the terms of the budget itself. It was important for us to have plans in place to deliver those efficiency savings. We're on track with those. My expectation at this stage of the year is that we will be able to achieve those. Looking ahead to next year, our asks are, I think, essentially an updated version of what I outlined to the committee last year. Our two priorities are to continue dealing with the consequences of the disruption to the courts in 2020-21 as a result of the public health emergency, and that work remains. We have made progress in the last year on that, but it is clear there is still much more work to be done on that, and that is a priority for us in the next year. And secondly, to make progress with and demonstrate the benefits of reform, which I talked about last year, and the position we're in this year is that I can be clearer for the committee that the reforms are delivering significant public benefit. And whereas in previous years I was scoping out our intention and our plans, I'm in a position this year to be absolutely clear that those reforms are working, and therefore our commitment is to conclude that work over the next year to 2 years, and that will put the criminal justice system as a whole in a much stronger position, and it will look very different for the public. And it's implicit in those two priorities that if we are not able to be funded to complete the reform work that I've highlighted, and if we're not able to successfully deal with the consequences of the court disruption earlier a few years ago, then the criminal justice system will continue to broadly look as it does at the moment. It will not operate any better for the public. So those are our priorities for next year, and the consequences are I think, implicit in what I've said there, that if we cannot make progress with reform, then we will not be able to deliver a faster, modern justice system which delivers better outcomes for the public.
Thank you very much. And I mean, certainly the submission that we received was very detailed and very helpful in that. So thank you for that and for your opening remarks. So moving across to Malcolm Graham.
Morning, Convener. Members, thanks for giving us the opportunity. In 24-25, as is laid out in the submission, we received around £8 million less than I had asked for. The Government acknowledged that it was significantly less than we'd asked for, and I only asked for what I felt we really needed. The consequence of that has meant that through the course of the year we've had to put in place some very stringent measures in terms of the size of the pay bill. So we've introduced a 6.49% vacancy factor, which effectively means that the pay bill as it's budgeted is 6.49% less than the number of people that we actually need in the organisation. We've had to make difficult choices about maintaining our estate. We're only in a position where we're able to respond to health and safety or wind and watertight issues across the critical estate that SCTS hosts other parts of the justice system and the courts and the tribunals in. And we haven't been able to invest in some of the changes for reform that we would have planned at the pace that we would have liked. For the year ahead, the main ask is that we get the RRT funding, which still sits with SCTS on a temporary basis, baselined into our budget. In essence, I feel I could make a strong case as to why SCTS should be a larger organisation to meet the growing demands and the complexity of those demands, but I haven't done that. What I've done, in line with the Scottish Government Public Sector Reform Strategy, is I've signed up to the suggested reductions, for instance, in corporate staff of 0.5% per year. But I've asked for a budget that will allow us to keep the organisation at the same size, but critically have also made a plea for a greater level of systemic investment in digitisation across the justice system, of which SCTS is a key part. And I think it's a matter of fact that there has been a structural deficit in that level of investment that's required for us to be able to benefit from the efficiencies that will allow us to become smaller organisations. If unsuccessful, to answer the final part of your question, the consequences are clear. We would need to be a smaller organisation. Our services would take longer. Trials would be delayed across the system, particularly in the parts where there's the greatest pressure, which at the moment is in the High Court for the most serious offences. Victims will not get the services that they need, neither will witnesses nor accused. It's likely that there will be pressure on the prison population because people will be on remand for longer, and ultimately it will undermine the trust and confidence in the courts and tribunal system.
Okay, thank you very much. Just by way of a couple of follow-up questions, if I may, and staying with yourself, Malcolm Graham, I mean, one of the issues that I found very interesting in your submission related to case management and the system that is utilised for case management, and how challenging things are insofar as the systems really becoming out of date. And I think that speaks to the sort of wider digital transformation that you've set out in your submission. I just wondered if you can maybe just cover off a little bit more detail about that, something that perhaps hasn't been on our radar as a committee in the past, but nonetheless sounds as though this is a major piece of work coming down the track.
Absolutely. The criminal case management system that the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service use is 25 years old. It has been propped up over the course of at least the last decade in a way that has been known as not sustainable. The consequence of that is that it's very time-consuming for staff to enter and process data. It presents a series of risks in terms of data protection and cyber security, which are difficult to mitigate. It doesn't provide the interconnectivity with other parts of the justice system that would allow us to benefit from re-engineering our processes to become more efficient, more service user-focused in the way that, quite rightly, citizens would expect digital services to come in this day and age. And ultimately is a part of that bigger pitch for investment in digital systems that can support processes for the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm sure members will look to drill into that a little bit more. If I can just final kind of follow-up question for yourself, John Logue, again referring to your very detailed submission. One of the pressures that you reflect in your submission relates to deaths requiring investigations, and that remains high, with I think you said a 22% increase in 2024 to 25 compared to pre-pandemic levels. And again, that's maybe something that is missed to a certain extent in the public eye. And I'm just interested in a wee bit, hearing a little bit more from you with regard to the challenges that Crown Office is facing around that broader responsibility around investigation of deaths.
Thank you. Our death investigation work is critically important, and we are dealing with a number of pressures, and I will just highlight some of them, and if the committee wishes me to, I can explore them in more detail at a later stage. But the obvious place to start is that we are still, for example, dealing with a very significant number of deaths which occurred during the pandemic, our COVID-related deaths, and we have just over 6,000 cases. Now, the scale of that can be illustrated by the fact that in an average year before the pandemic, we would receive approximately 10,000 deaths of all types to be investigated. And so we have there a very, very significant body of work, but we're making good progress. We have dedicated funding from the Scottish Government. We have a team of approximately 80 people who are working through those cases and making good progress. We have concluded our investigations in approximately 2,500 of those cases, with 3,500 to go. So we're a little short of halfway through that specific piece of work. But the pressures come from a number of other areas. So, for example, death investigations, we cannot control, and it's a degree of frustration for us, we cannot control the timescales of death investigations in the way that we can criminal investigations. And there are a number of reasons for that. And death investigations involve a wide range of other public bodies who have their own investigatory interest in deaths, particularly in incidents where multiple fatalities happen at the same time. And so there is a difficulty and complexity for us there in having to coordinate our own investigation with those of others, and to be able to manage the timescales and meet the expectations of the public, in particular the bereaved nearest relatives of the person who has died. And that's particularly acute and difficult for us, I have to say, in relation to deaths of children, for example. But another area of complexity which has increased relates to, unfortunately, deaths of those who are in custody at the time they die. And the numbers we have indicate that over a 5-year period we're dealing with perhaps twice as many of those than we were 4 or 5 years ago. So we're in 1 year recently, I think, the most recent year that we have figures for, there were 63 custody deaths. Okay. And these are complex. These require very difficult issues relating to the conditions in which people were being held at the time of their death to be investigated. So there is increasing pressure there. And our response over the last few years has been to try and develop not just an expertise in death investigation itself, but to actually develop subspecialties of expertise. So actually we now have a dedicated team who will look just simply on a day-to-day basis at the deaths of those who are in custody. We have a dedicated team who will look at the deaths of children, and we're increasingly able to develop a thematic approach to these, which I think will have significant public benefit in years to come. But the pressure there is, broadly speaking, this is an area of work where there are no statutory time limits, whereas in our criminal work, Parliament has decreed that there will be statutory time limits. And there is an obvious consequence there that if we are not funded to the level where we're able to progress the work to the standards that the public expect, we will have to focus our people on the work that has statutory time limits.
Thank you.
And therefore, our work on our death investigations will unfortunately take longer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. That's very comprehensive and very helpful. Okay, I'm going to open up and bring in Liam Kerr, followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. I'll put this question to both of you, but I'll start with Malcolm Graham. First of all, modelling suggests that there will be a need for increased High Court capacity going forward in the longer term. The RRT funding that was put in place following COVID for additional High Court and Sheriff Solemn Courts, I think ends in March 2026. So if that comes to pass, are resources available for the increased capacity of the High Court without continuation of that additional funding?
The short answer to that question is no. And in fact, if the RRT is now baselined, then we will still need to make considerable adjustments to the court programme to accommodate the extra demands coming into the High Court. As I lay out in the submission in a little bit more detail, the exceptional levels of cases being indicted in the High Court is predicted to continue for some time. And at the point that the RRT funding was introduced, as has already been mentioned, it was a necessary and very welcome additional funding to deal with the COVID backlog. But the world has changed significantly in the space of time since those decisions were made. And with the additional funding that's gone to the Crown and their capacity to prosecute more High Court cases, the vast majority of those complex sexual offence cases that take more time and require more resource through the court system, we're going to have to do something different if we want to be able to provide services that are adequate to those that expect to receive them. In essence, the modelling shows that without some form of intervention, both the timescale for those cases to come to trial or to be resolved and the number of cases in the system is going to double within the space of 18 months to 2 years. And that trajectory would continue to an unacceptable level in a short time after that. We're looking at plans as to how we can, as best we can, divert any capacity from other parts of the system. So we've had some really good successes through summary case management in terms of creating capacity at the lower end of the courts. And there's the potential we can convert some of that capacity into the High Courts. But it's not a direct translation. It's different skills, it's different people, and it's a different forum. But on top of that, we believe that we will still need something different. The final point I would mention briefly is, of course, the prospect of the Specialist Sexual Offences Court, which we're now starting the planning for. And we don't anticipate that that will necessarily achieve any direct efficiencies, but it does give us an opportunity collectively, working with judicial leadership, the Crown and other key court users, to look at how we can best use that opportunity to ensure that we provide services to victims and others in the court system that's going to be commensurate with the purpose that lies behind the Sexual Offences Court, recognising that really significant increase in cases that wasn't predicted at the time that these ideas were concepts.
I'm very grateful. Just before I move to John Logue, at the very start of your answer, Malcolm, you talked about something being baselined. Now, I think I'm right in saying, I just want to give you the opportunity to clarify that for people watching. What did you mean by baselined? And is it not the case that on the RRT funding, SCTS was treated differently than other organisations in relation to baselined RRT?
Yes, so not initially. The RRT funding was made available to a number of justice organisations on a temporary basis. For other organisations, it was baselined at an earlier stage. And for the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, it wasn't. I think this time last year at this committee, I made the same plea to say that the signs were cases were going up, the world was changing, and we would require that funding to be baseline to be able to provide the services that I've just explained in some detail. In essence, as you said at the start of your observations, Mr Kerr, that funding is only committed until March 2026, and if it's removed, it would have very significant consequences of the nature that I described in relation to the first question.
Very grateful. John Logue.
We are currently funded for the current capacity in the High Court, and the short answer would be that any increase in that capacity in the High Court would either require additional funding for additional people, or we would have to find other ways of stopping other work in order to free up the people to take on the additional capacity in the High Court.
Thank you. For my next question, I'll come to John Logue first of all, and I remind, because I'm going to ask about solicitors, I remind everyone that I am a practicing solicitor regulated by the Law Society of Scotland. John Logue, Malcolm Graham mentioned in his answer there the summary case management system in passing. The FDA have raised concerns about the capacity to deliver improvements under the summary case management model with the current staffing levels. And the Scottish Solicitors Bar Association have said defence solicitors are due to withdraw from that scheme due to their concerns around legal aid rates. Can you update the committee, John Logue, on the summary case management rollout and any resource impact that it might have? And also, if you wouldn't mind, respond to the FDA's suggestion and give us an update on the Bar Association's position.
The summary case management project is almost complete in terms of its rollout. So we are now almost at the stage where it's the standard way of working in all of the summary courts across the country. I think the final courts are due to come on board in December and the first few weeks in January. So by January of next year, we will be in the position that summary case management is no longer what it was when I first described it to the committee. It is just the standard way of working in our summary courts. It has been very successful. It is the only project in my 30 years as a prosecutor that I have seen that has succeeded in bringing together in partnership all of the different parties who work in the court, led by the judiciary, and has succeeded in changing not just the processes, but also the culture in the court, and changing the expectations on the part of the public about what a very busy summary court should be able to deliver for the local people who are served by that court. And the simplest way I think I can illustrate that, rather than giving you a raft of statistics, is we often talk about Dundee because it was one of the first courts to adopt the new way of working, and it's further ahead. And there's no doubt that the longer period of time by which a court is operating the model, the more sustained and significant the benefits become. So some of the courts that are just coming on board with it, we wouldn't expect to see very significant benefits for the public, perhaps for another 12 to 18 months. But in Dundee, if you take the position that has been achieved in Dundee and you project it forward on a national basis, the current workload of all the summary courts at the moment is about 12 to 13,000, I think, outstanding summary trials, with cases waiting to come to trial across the country. Now that is lower, just slightly lower than it was before the pandemic. So we've succeeded in bringing it down from about 30,000 at the peak of the pandemic to slightly lower than it was. But we have confidence on the basis of what's happened in Dundee that if we project forward and can achieve the same benefit with consistency in all sheriff courts, you could conceivably be looking at a workload of about 6,000 cases. And that's 6,000 cases that are more likely to come to trial at the first time the trial is fixed, that require fewer witnesses to be cited. That has a benefit for the public. Cases resolve more quickly. Cases that are going to resolve, and we have to remember the majority of cases in the summary system resolve without the need for a trial. But under the old system, they tended to resolve at the point of trial. They resolve at a much earlier stage, and therefore the system does not need to prepare those cases for trial. So within what I'm describing, it should be obvious, I think, to the committee, from their understanding of the system, there are a multitude of benefits for the public primarily, but also then for the constituent parts of the system, and we are able then to make choices about how we use our people. So that's a very quick summary of what's been achieved. In terms of the FDA concern, I understand the FDA concern. I have very good relationships and discussions with the FDA. I think my confidence is that we're almost at the end of the rollout. We've succeeded, and we're just about there, I think, in making this the standard way of working. But I also know from the meetings that I have with colleagues in all of our offices around the country, I can see a very clear difference in talking to prosecutors who work in courts where the model's established, where they are more enthusiastic and find it a much more satisfying way to work. But I also see on the part of the colleagues in courts where they're yet to adopt it that they have an understandable concern about how is this going to work. So I think what they, I can't speak for the FDA, but I think what they are reflecting is in courts where they're yet to move and adopt the model, there is an understandable concern about how this will work. But we can look at all the courts and have confidence that it is working. As for the SSBA, I cannot speak to the SSBA and their own position. I think I would simply observe that it's obvious from what I've said that there are significant public benefits in every court in this country, apart from the one court in the country where the SSBA is publicly stating that they are trying to frustrate the aims of summary case management. And given the spirit of partnership that I've spoken about, for me personally, that's a very, very disappointing situation that we find ourselves in. It's the public who are suffering in Lothian and Borders.
Malcolm Graham, do you want to come in? Or
just very briefly, I agree with all that the Crown Agent has said, so I won't repeat that. The peak of outstanding trials post-COVID was 43,000, and we've reduced that to now under 16,000, which for the first time is below what it was before COVID happened. That's across all cases. Summary case management has played a significant part in that reduction in recent years, and it's anticipated when the rollout is complete, which, as the Crown Agent said, is close, that it will result in at least 3,200 less trials being fixed per year. At the moment, we're fixing about 40,000 summary trials, and that it will reduce the annual level of police witness citations by over 50,000. And I do think these are really significant data points that speak for themselves. Transitions to a new order are often challenging, and what this requires is a different way of working across all the justice partners, including the Scottish Courts and Tribunals Service and the judiciary. It requires more upfront preparation, and it requires us to programme in more case management hearings. But getting through that transition is worth it for the really significant benefits that can be evidenced coming out the back of it.
Very grateful. Convener.
Thank you. Jamie Hepburn, followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Convener, this is a question asked to Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority last week, so it's a question for both organisations. Can you say what the impact of the increase to employers' national insurance contributions has been for both organisations? I don't know if you've got the figure just now. If you're not, you could provide it to us later.
I can come in first if helpful. I don't have the figure to hand in terms of exactly what the consequence was financially, but organisationally the consequence was that we had to make savings in other places to be able to afford that. And that then goes to the points that I made earlier about the consequences of the shortfall in the budget settlement compared with the ask from last year.
If you're able to find the figures and provide them, it would be really
happy to supply
really helpful. Mr. Graham.
So similarly, I don't have the exact figures of the increase to hand. However, like my colleague said there, it is around having to make adjustments to it. Similarly, whilst our people have benefited hugely from the pay offer that has recently been submitted, been published, which is positive for them. That is over and above what the budget was that we were allocated, and therefore we'll need to make adjustments if we're not receive of extra funding. And similarly, that will carry through into following years as well to be able to maintain our resource levels. But okay. I'll be able to write with the exact figure for
That'd be great. No, that'd be really really helpful. Just a few other questions, Convener. First, it relates to the submission from the Crown Office Procurator's Fiscal Service, and you talk in your submission for the next financial year, £5 million of efficiencies are embedded within what you say is your requirement. Can you talk a little bit more about what that constitutes and how that might impact your service and operability?
So as Crown Agent said earlier, we're aiming for 7 million this year, which was our self-imposed efficiency, because we are always looking for ways in which we can achieve that. We've given ourselves the target of 5 million for next year. In part, some of that is about realism around recruitment, time lags, a bit of optimism bias in that. We will consistently look for how we can reduce costs. So actually drawing the link here to the summary case management, we've already reduced the costs of travel and subsistence and expenses claims from witnesses coming to court, because we're not calling as many people to that. So it's areas like that bring some of the wider efficiency through that will help support the 5 million that we are seeking and self-imposing on ourselves for next year.
Okay. But that's been worked through, and that will not impact the service provided.
No, it won't, because we are constantly seeking for that. We will start to see some of the benefits of some of the wider activity that we've got. It is imperative that we maintain our resource levels for next year, and that will therefore require that budget uplift to be able to maintain that resource levels. If we are unable to achieve that and are kept in a flat cash situation, the risk there is around 10% of our workforce. It would not be funded for next year, based on what we know around pay increases, inflationary pressures, etc., which would, in those circumstances, have quite a considerable impact on what we are able to deliver for the public.
Okay. Turning to the submission from the Scottish Courts and Tribunal, its service, and this kind of picks up on something that the Chief Constable spoke about, one of the threats that we know about and continues to develop and change, and as a risk across the board, you cite the challenge of cybersecurity and say the threat picture continues to grow. So I guess it would just be useful to understand, and it would be sensible, I suppose, to ask about specific incidents, so I'm not going to do that, but how much of a real challenge is that, and what impact does that have in terms of budget requirements? And I suppose it might not have been cited specifically the same way in the Crown Office submission, but it would be useful to understand in terms of the organisation there what's an issue. But Mr Graham first, perhaps.
No, thank you for asking for some more detail on that. I won't go into specific incidents, but all the committee members will be acutely aware of, at times, the existential threat that is posed to public service and other organisations who are subject to a significant cyber attack. And as an accountable officer, it will not surprise you to know that I take that prospect extremely seriously. It's one of the few areas, not quite uniquely, that I have chosen to put additional investment into during the course of this year, despite the budget pressures. And that comes for two reasons. One, there is an increasing requirement for us to provide a broader range of services across digital platforms that we need to support ourselves, and therefore we are responsible for ensuring cyber safety and security, not just for SCTS staff and the judiciary, but also for other court users and members of the public. And I take that duty extremely seriously. And the second point I would flag is that touches on the question from the convener earlier, with the inability to invest at the scale and pace we would like in digital systems that are fit for the 21st century, we face an increasing risk of cyber insecurity in the systems that we have to continue running. And we have to spend more money disproportionately to try to shore up a safe system. And it comes to a point where the only answer is actually to replace these systems and to build them into a network of interfacing justice digital modules that can be designed to be cyber safe for the world that we now live in.
Mr Lowe or Ms Green can talk about the organisational perspective.
It would not surprise the committee to hear that it features as one of the most serious risks on our strategic risk register around cyber and the impact that may have on it. I'm confident as Chief Operating Officer we have as good processes as we can in place. We specifically monitor threats at all times. But we're not complacent about that. It is something, and not least as we roll out more public-facing risk systems like the Defence Agents Service that we've rolled out in the last year, that increases greater risk as well. So it's about putting the prospective things in place. But like my colleague from SCCS, we have similar challenges with some ageing systems that are finding it harder to maintain and keep them protected against as well.
Does this maybe pick up, and I think if I picked you up correctly, Mr Graham, what you referred to earlier, is this something that should be done on a collaborative basis across the justice system, or indeed perhaps wider? It's not just the component parts of the justice system we're facing this challenge. Is there something to be said for a wider collaborative effort in terms of cyber resilience?
Absolutely, and I would pay credit to the efforts that the Scottish Government have put in place in terms of the creation of the Scottish Cyber Security Centre. We work very closely with them. We work with the Scottish Cyber and Fraud Centre extremely closely, and these are bodies that are not exclusively but mainly directed at public services and keeping them safe and secure in the cyber world. We work very closely with other UK agencies who provide support, and we also work with private sector, third-party providers for things like incident response and incident management and recovery, all of which are necessary and diligent things to put in place. But we can't do any of that on our own as an organisation. And we don't have the opportunity, if we're not rebuilding a digital ecosystem across justice at the scale and pace that we need to build this stuff in at the foundations. We're having to retrospectively try and fit it on top of systems that, quite frankly, weren't designed for the threats that we face today.
Okay, thank you.
Sharon Dowie, then Rona Mackay.
Thank you. Good morning. We'll start off with John Logue. The COP submission sets out proposed essential resource funding and minimum capital requirements of £236.5 million and £7.6 million respectively, noting that this does not fund expansion or additional service provision. What would be the consequences of not receiving these minimum requirements? And should you only receive these, what would COPs not be able to do in the coming year?
Thank you. I think there's an important point to stress at the beginning here that, from our perspective, protecting public safety is non-negotiable. And so the broad consequence of not having the funding that we need for next year is that the pace at which we are able to work, and I include within that our operational work, but I also include the reform work that we spent time talking about this morning, the pace at which we're able to do that work will suffer. The consequence of that for the public will be most noticeable in relation to our casework. And I spoke earlier in very general terms about we would need to pivot our people towards casework which has time limits, because we cannot allow our criminal casework with time limits to fail the time limits. And so there would be a noticeable change for the public quite quickly in terms of what that would mean for them and the cases that they are directly involved in. So I can perhaps say a little bit more about the detail of that just to illustrate it. So, for example, I spoke earlier about our COVID death investigations team. Now, we have approximately 80 people, as I said, working on that, dealing with it. We still have 3,500 cases to investigate and conclude. Yvette would be able to say more about the detail of the funding, but the consequence of, for example, flat cash that Yvette referenced would mean, as she said, that it's the equivalent of a 10% of our workforce in a shortfall. That's about 260 people, full-time equivalent. Our normal turnover every year is only about 100 people. So on average, every year, people who leave, who retire, who move to other jobs, about 100 people leave us every year. If we have a shortfall of about 260, that normal turnover will not allow us to meet the financial savings required. We will have to then pivot people away. But even if, for example, we were to stop specialising in COVID deaths and redirect the 80 people into work that had time limits, that's 80 people when you're still short of 100. So it's only half of the remaining gap. So broadly speaking, what we would need to do is, over time, as people leave, replace those who are leaving from criminal casework with time limits by moving people who are doing work, for example, in our death investigations, where there is no time limit, or move people away from large, complex criminal investigations which have not yet got to the point of someone being in court and there being a time limit. And so rather than, as we are able to at the moment, dedicating, for example, teams of people to either criminal cases or large, complex death investigations like the Jenners fire, or the hotel fire in Perth, or the tug sinking in the Clyde. These are all cases which, by their complexity, demand us to have a team of people on them. We would no longer be able to do that because we would gradually have to be taking people away from those teams to fill the gaps in the criminal casework where there's a time limit. We would have to start, I think I'm very clear on this, I think we would need to be upfront with the families in those death investigations and be clear that we were having to slow them down, because instead of dedicated teams, we would end up with individuals carrying a number of cases, some of which may be COVID deaths, and the ability to get through that casework for one individual compared to a dedicated team is obvious in terms of its consequences. So I think that would be, at a very general level, the way in which I would describe the consequences of not having the resource that we need next year. But I think I should also stress, in asking for our resource that we need for next year, we are recognising the broader pressure on public sector finances. I think it's important to stress that. As Malcolm said earlier, there are any one of a number of good evidence-based reasons that we could build a case around to argue for expanded capacity, to have more people. For next year's budget, we're not asking for that. We're not asking to have more people and expand our capacity. We're asking to stay as we are and allow us to do what I said at the beginning, which is progress the reform work and deal with the consequences of the court disruption that came from the pandemic. If we can succeed in that, then I think the criminal justice system will look very, very different between 2027 and 2030, and we'll have much better public outcomes.
Thank you. You've also mentioned in the submission about cost pressures arising from the implementation of body-worn video, and that's an unfunded responsibility. So could you tell us more about the cost pressures that you expect to face with that, and is that something that you've discussed with the Scottish Government for extra funding?
I think at the moment we are not clear yet what that is, but we can see it as a pressure. It's unusual that whether it's some legislative changes or changes to operational procedures do not bring some additional costs with it sometimes. The reason we are not clear at the moment is it's a balance between, with the elements like summary case management, we actually might see some benefit through body-worn video being able to produce evidence earlier and be able to actually bring some cases to conclusion at an earlier point. But similarly, we may find that there is a greater uplift because there is greater evidence of cases to allow them to proceed to prosecution. So at the moment, we're not that clear what that cost is. Naturally, we need to learn probably from other organisations, from police in England and Wales around what they saw as the impact of that. So we're flagging it as a risk at the moment, but one that we don't actually have a cost to be able to put against at present.
Okay, thanks. So is it safe to say that although you're making efficiency savings, the efficiency savings that you make aren't going to actually be savings because you actually need to go and focus that money elsewhere?
Absolutely.
To keep
Absolutely.
making all the improvements that you're making within the system.
There's a few things here, isn't there? We make efficiencies to be able to deal with the increased caseload that's coming towards us, and to continue to clear the backlogs, but also to continue to reform as an organisation. And if we look at the amount of scrutiny we come under, without the resources, it becomes harder to be able to respond to things like the Inspector of Prosecution's reports and recommendations, as well as to be able to progress the cases. So it is about being able to maintain a steady state.
You've actually mentioned increased caseload or case volumes that are coming in, and also the complexity of them. So in your budget proposals, which only provides for essential funding requirements, does that include forecasts for increased staff levels due to the potential of growing case level or complexity?
So we've not asked for any increased staff. The budget bid that we have submitted, which has just slightly increased because of the pay deal, is to maintain the status quo. So, you know, while we are saying we will continue to absorb, we will be able to absorb some of the additional costs that come from some of that complexity. But that is that balance between where we are finding efficiencies in other part of the wider system.
But you need to keep your staffing levels where they are just
Absolutely.
now.
If without that, then we won't be able to deliver. And, you know, just building on what the Crown Agent said earlier, there is the practicality of, you know, given that our churn is low, how would we actually release people? Because, you know, we're in a no redundancy agreement, so therefore the practicality of being able to reduce the staffing numbers, and so therefore there is a real risk of actually breaching our control limits if we're not careful.
Okay, thank you. And final question to both of you. The Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Act 2025 includes a range of provisions which may be expected to impact on resources, for example, the proposed Sexual Offences Court. Could you advise what stage of planning your organisations are at in preparing for the implementation of the Act, including identifying when any additional resources might be needed? I want to start with Malcolm Graham for that one.
Yep, thanks very much. The work to prepare for the Sexual Offences Court has been going on for some time in terms of SCTS having a very small team that was funded on a temporary basis through the Scottish Government to support the development of the policy in preparation of the bill that's now an Act. You know, that team has now turned its attention to working with others to look at what the consequences of implementation are going to be. But we made it very clear at the point that formal submissions were made. I think this is reflected in the financial memorandum, that it wasn't possible for us to fully account for what the cost implications of, for instance, that significant element of the Act. And of course there are many, many more. And we're now going through that process, and we'll be very closely working with government and other organisations to ensure that that develops and is articulated when it's available.
Okay, thank you. John Logue.
Very similar for us to the position that Malcolm's just outlined for the court service. I think I would emphasise that the increased costs that will come with the Act are not part of our plans for next year because we are at such an early stage. But I need to emphasise that our planning for example, the Sexual Offences Court is based on the fact there will be very significant costs associated with establishing the Sexual Offences Court, and we cannot absorb those costs in amongst the other pressures that we've been discussing, and that will need to be, there will therefore need to be over and above the existing discussions about next year's budget. There would need to be very specific discussions about the costs that will come from implementation of the Act.
Thank you.
Rona Mackay, then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. And good morning, panel. Could I start possibly by asking John Logue, please, and you may have covered this partly with my colleague Sharon's earlier question, but the FDA and the PCS believe that resources are kind of being targeted to high priority areas, such as the high court or the specialised casework that you've spoken about, at the expense of local court work. Do you recognise that, and are your budget asks going to be enough to cover both to balance it out?
I don't recognise that description of it. I don't accept that that's correct. The part of our organisation which deals with casework in local sheriff courts is just simply in terms of numbers the largest part of the organisation. It's the part of the organisation where we've focused considerable effort, for example, in relation to summary case management, but also some of the digital improvements we've introduced this year have had a benefit either solely in the work in the Sheriff Court or predominantly in the Sheriff Court. So I don't accept the characterisation that we prioritise other parts of the organisation at the expense of one part.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting to have on the record. And so the summary case management initiative sounds very successful, in fact transformative, once it's fully rolled out. So I'm just wondering how much, and I know you're making efficiencies and you've set yourself a target of 5 million, etc. How much operational changes could be made to save money, basically? And are you up to the max with that? Are you doing that as much as you can?
I'm sorry, are you asking specifically in relation to summary case management or more
No,
generally?
sorry, just in general, operational initiatives that you can do, because that they don't actually require a lot of money? Is that being done to the max?
Well, I would never be complacent about that and say we're doing absolutely everything, but summary case management is not the only focus that we have in terms of trying to be as efficient as possible and to improve the way we work. We're always looking to do that either at a national level or with other organisations across the system like the court service, or even at a local level, encouraging people to find better ways of working. And so, personally speaking, one of the things I would like to do is, as prosecutors, what can we learn from summary case management that we can apply in other parts of our work would be an area of focus in the future. So I think it would be wrong to say that we think the system as a whole is operating at maximum efficiency at the moment. I wouldn't want anyone to think that I thought that was the case. I think there is always more we can do, and it's just about having the right leadership focus on that, about maintaining the confidence of our colleagues who are actually doing the operational work, that is important and that we recognise the role that they have to play in that, but also having the right plans in place and discussions with the other parts of the system, because one of the key learning points from summary case management is that one part of the system can't change the whole system by itself.
Yes,
you really get the benefits when we work together.
Thank you, that's useful. Can I ask you, Malcolm, you've said an absolute priority is money for digital investment and expansion. I might have missed it. I don't think I saw in your submission a figure. Are you able to put a figure on what you'll need to spend on that?
No, I mean, for SCTS, we have a plan for next year if we were successful in baselining the RRT funding as to broadly the allocation that we could put towards investment in digital alongside running digital services, but it's very modest in terms of the quantum that we would actually need to make the changes that we know can bring service improvements and efficiencies to the things that we're doing. I think the bigger prize is to look at it at a system level. And I think that there's a significant gap between the level of investment that's come into the justice system compared with what is needed to maximise these benefits. Within SCTS, like the Crown Agent, we're constantly looking at what we can do with the resource we've got. But I've spent a significant amount of my time in my first year travelling around the country, visiting staff who are working in tribunals, in courts, in the Office of the Public Guardian, and they're all running hot. They're working at pace every day, and they don't have the capacity to be able to introduce and think about new ways of working. We need to be able to support and fund people to do that, even if it doesn't require investment in new systems. But the biggest changes will come through moving an organisation that's cash heavy towards digital payments, that's paper heavy towards digital transactions, that doesn't interface well with other partners in a logical or efficient way to be connected in a digital way that's safe and secure. And that's what we need investment for across the system.
And so are you envisaging a possible sort of phase-in of parts of it, depending on what investment you get, rather than doing a wholesale, transformation digitally? You're sort of saying, well, we could do that just now and it might help. And then is that kind of the way you're looking at it?
It's in progress, but the pace has been slow and the success has been limited because it's been confined by the low level of investment into what would actually be required. We're working collectively to try to build what I think will be a compelling proposition jointly with the government to be able to present that, I think, at national level, to say the justice system is a critically important part of what underlays the foundations of the democracy that we live in, and it needs a level of investment to ensure that it's both effective and efficient for the future, accepting the challenges we face.
And presumably your view would be that investment in that will save money in future, and so your budget asks in the future might not be as great once you're fully digitised, and those efficiencies could be met.
I think the positive, optimistic future is that we can have smaller organisations that can provide better services more efficiently in digital ways, connected with each other, that are going to be more commensurate with what court users, tribunal users, the public would expect. And I think that's the optimistic kind of role of leaders, is to be able to paint that picture, but also do the evidence-based work so that we can come up with you know, the benefits and articulate that against the costs in a very data-driven way, and that's the work that we're engaged in at the moment.
Yeah, and do you have a sort of target date for? Okay, maybe it's a wish target date, but of when you would like that to be completed?
Well, we've agreed to do a first phase of work on this in advance of the election, and my anticipation is that across the justice system, you know, with the good faith and support of the other leaders that we currently have, we would really have to spend the first year building the case and articulating what that level of investment is likely to be across a sustained period for the transformation that's required.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Pauline McNeill and then Fulton McGregor.
Thank you. Good morning. Can I begin by asking John Logue about the time limits in High Court, which we discussed before. So the COVID time limits, if you like, emergency comes to an end in November, except for cases that are already started. So presumably that means that at the end of November we'll go back to the time limits in the 95 Act. Is that 80 days for the Crown then? Is that at the end of November to indict cases for the High Court? What's the time period for that?
So there's a number of different time limits, but you're correct.
To indictment.
You're correct that as of the end of this month, they will revert with effect from the 1st of December for all accused to appear in court on or after that date to the traditional limits that we've operated to before the pandemic. And so, from our perspective, that would require us to serve an indictment if the accused is in custody within 80 days. And it would require there to be a first diet or a preliminary hearing within 110 days. And different time limits apply if the accused is on bail, and there are obviously different time limits which are unaffected by this change, which relate to summary cases.
So, is there anything built into the budget for that added pressure? Have you asked for anything? Presumably, you're not going to do that on day one, but or are you?
Well, we're required to do it, but that is the consequence of the change that Parliament made this year. And I think this was the broader point I was making last year, that we are having to adapt to the changes that Parliament has decided should be made. So Parliament has decided that this is an immediate change from the 1st of December. So everyone appearing in court from the 1st of December, their case, we will have to operate to those time limits. Now, what that means is there will be a period of time which I think will last for about 18 months where the criminal justice system has to operate with two sets of time bars side by side, which is a more complicated picture than we've ever been used to. Prior to the pandemic, we had one set of time bars which we were all used to. During the pandemic, we moved to elongated time bars, but it was still one set of time bars for everything. From the end of November, we're moving to a dual system. Now, in expressing the complexity in that, it is preferable, as I said last year, to what would have been the case at the end of November. So I'm very grateful to Parliament for making this change. But we knew in asking for that change.
But there will be an additional resource required, in your view, or not?
Well, we have been given additional resource. That was the additional resource we were given this year for additional people to deal with that pressure. And we have those people, and we're using that resource. And because it's going to last for a period of 12 to 18 months where we have the dual system, our view is that we will need those people in that resource through 26, 27 and into the early part of 27, 28. And that's part of the discussions for next year's budget.
Thank you. So in your submission, you also talk about the impact of the change to the law on corroboration. So obviously it's more work for prosecutors with slight change to the law. But does that mean that there will necessarily be a lot more cases in your view? So I'm trying to ascertain again, what's the additional resource with this law change?
Yes, that's a much more difficult question to quantify. Yeah. I mean, my personal view is there will be more cases, and we're already seeing that. And anecdotally, prosecutors will tell you they are now seeing cases reported by the police which either wouldn't have been reported before the change in the law, or we would have required to take no action in them because of the previous understanding of the law of evidence. So we are seeing that. It's very difficult to quantify what that's going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So it's very, very difficult to build an evidence base and a resource bid around that. But we're working at that and sharing that information from the government. I mean, what I can tell you is in the last financial year for 24-25, we served 1,100 High Court indictments. The projections for this year are that we will serve 1,300 High Court indictments. Now, I can't tell you how much of that increase is due to the change in the law, but I know, speaking from prosecutors who are dealing with this, that they are seeing these cases coming to us now and that we're dealing with them. And that was the consequence that was obvious to us at the point the law changed.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Malcolm Graham on the same subject of delays in the High Court? So what impact is that likely to have in your view? Because we're not meeting the times at the moment. In fact, I think the waiting times have gone up post-COVID, which is disappointing, you know, from everyone's point of view. But when the time limits from the 95 Act then kick in end of November, what, in your view, will be the impact on delay? Are those times likely to go up again?
Yes. As per the modelling that Liam Kerr referred to earlier in his questions, the prediction is that without some change in the capacity in the system, then waiting times are going to elongate and the number of cases in the system will grow. At the moment, the number of High Court scheduled pending trials is just over 900. That's the first time that it's been that high, I think, ever. But certainly the pre-COVID level was in 2019-20 was 390. So it gives you some sense of the scale of the number of cases that are in the system awaiting resolution. As I pointed out earlier, that change is going to happen very rapidly without some level of intervention. The waiting times potentially could double within less than the next 2 years, and we're already up at, I think, 41, 42 weeks. That's the period between when somebody first appears and the case is resolved. There's, of course, often a long period of time, perhaps approaching a year, where the case is with the Crown, and a period before that from when the crime has occurred that can be very lengthy as well. So the impact on victims, on witnesses, in terms of the anxiety and the trauma is likely to be significant.
What I want to ask you about, if you don't mind, is, in your view, what do you need from the government in this budget, given what you've said to the committee, that there's more likely to be an increase in waiting times for the High Court?
We need the temporary RRT funding baselined so that we can maintain that size in the system, and we need investment at a greater scale than we've had for digitisation to allow us to make the systems more efficient so that we can get through more work in a quicker pace. And a little bit like the Crown Agent has said, recognising and responding to the government's requests and strong signals in terms of public sector funding. We're not asking for more resource to grow the organisation, but I think that comes with an expectation, as the First Minister has said publicly, that digitisation and transformation through digitisation of the public realm is the answer to having more efficient and smaller public services. Well, I'm committing to doing our bit in terms of keeping the organisation the same size as it's at, and a commitment to making it smaller. The public service reform strategy at the moment doesn't have a funding stream attached to it for that digitisation, and that's what we need.
And if you get your ask, if so to speak, for this additional funding, you think you could get those times back to where they should be in terms of the 95 Act, or?
I don't think it's quite as straightforward as that in terms of there being a direct sort of causal correlation between investment in digitisation and pulling those times back in. There's a large number of variables that we will need to manage in terms of balancing across the system.
So what do you need then? What do you need from this budget to stop this trend of waiting times in the High Court? Could you?
It's going to be very, very difficult to stop that happening now because of the nature and the cases that are coming in. I think what we can do is seek to mitigate that rise by the RRT funding being baselined and ensuring that we've got sufficient investment to be able to make best use of the staff we've got with better systems.
So what you're saying is there isn't anything in particular you could point to Like if you know, if you could get anything you wanted to get these times down, you can't tell me what that would be.
Well, the size of the system isn't purely constrained by SCTS resource. So, as the Crown Agent's already said, their budget submission, I think I'm right in saying, is founded upon the current size of the High Court system. So there would be implications for the Crown. There would be implications for the Faculty of Advocates in terms of defence, for solicitors. There would be implications because we might not have the court space to be able to grow the number of courts that you would need. There are other limiting factors than just budget in terms of the answer to this exceptional problem, which has come about for a variety of reasons which are actually very positive in terms of dealing with some of these instances from the past and the present in a very different way. And we're going to have to think much more creatively and recognise a requirement for investment to tackle it in the years ahead.
Thank you. Just finally, you say in your submission that in relation to the tribunal work that the Scottish Court Tribunal Services is taken on as an addition to the work that you currently do, you say that the administrative costs without any associated revenue stream to offset some of those costs. Does that mean that you're absorbing existing costs?
Yes, in some cases where tribunals have been devolved in recent years, there has been an arrangement where the funding from Scottish Government remains flexible and we get that as an in-year settlement in terms of the cost of the system, but other parts of the system have been baselined and there's continued to be growth that then isn't funded additionally, and we have to find ways of doing that. If we can't find ways of doing that, which is what's happening in some parts of the system at the moment, then we can't deal with the level of growth of case. And the consequence is that it takes longer to resolve these cases, and there are more cases in the system. The best example of that, or in some cases perhaps the worst example, is the Social Security Tribunal, which has undergone devolution, as you'll understand, is critical as a part of Scotland's social security system, but which is under significant pressure as new and different payments come in and are challenged. And some of the time delays in terms of those cases being resolved, critical issues for people that are making a submission to the tribunal, are now taking a length of time that I think's excessive and way beyond what is acceptable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I am aware that we're running over time. I'm keen to get Fulton McGregor in for a final question, if our witnesses are okay just to stay a few moments longer, and apologies for that. Fulton McGregor.
Thanks, Convener. And it may be one that can be answered briefly given the Convener's urge for time. Both organisations, good morning, sorry, I should say, both organisations last year, when you were in front of committee, set out the importance for multi-year funding allocations. I'm wondering if there's been any progress on this, any discussions with the Scottish Government or any other body about moving this forward, because I remember both last year stressing that it would be important.
For our part, the position remains as it was last year, and being perfectly frank, I mean, I think the opportunity for us as an organisation of prosecutors to influence the government approach and all of that is fairly limited. The government continues to operate the budget in the way that it does. What I have done in the last year, working with the VET and other colleagues, is begun to look at how internally we can develop our own planning for future years to try and overcome some of the difficulties that come with annual budget planning and begin to try and give a little bit more certainty to some of our own financial plans over a multi-year basis. So I think our priorities internally are more focused on that than trying to, from the position of being a relatively small organisation, try and affect a very significant change to the way in which the Scottish Government manages its whole budget.
Very quickly, the position remains that we can't carry reserves, we're not allowed to borrow, and we're not allowed to carry over underspend. And the level of inflexibility that produces on an annualised basis is a very inefficient way to run a large and complex public service. We've done similar to the Crown Agent we've moved to a position of multi-year capital planning. We're doing that jointly with the government, but it's notional because we don't have any prediction or assurance about what the capital settlement will be for the years that we're planning ahead. And you know, what is positive, I think, as we go through a multi-year spending review period, we have had the opportunity to at least lay out what our projections would be for both revenue and capital funding beyond the year ahead, and that at least is welcomed.
Much. Okay, thank you for that. There was one final question that I was going to ask, but we're short of time, and so I'll maybe just ask if you would be happy to perhaps write to the committee, and it's with regard to climate change. So parliamentary committees are looking a bit more closely at the work that stakeholders, public sector organisations are undertaking with regard to reducing their carbon footprint and reducing carbon emissions and essentially meeting our collective climate change targets. So I'd be very interested if you'd be able to maybe set out a little bit of detail on what your respective organisations are doing around that and whether or not you might require some further resource to support that work. Hopefully that's fairly clear, bit of a synopsis, but we look forward to receiving your submissions on that. Thank you very much. So thank you all for your attendance today. I think that's been a really interesting session, and I'll now suspend briefly to allow a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed, members. So can I now welcome to our meeting Stuart Stevens, Chief Officer, Andy Watt, Deputy Chief Officer, and Sarah O'Donnell, Deputy Chief Officer, Corporate Services with Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So you're all very welcome this morning, and thank you for sending your detailed written submission. So just before we start, I am conscious that we have overrun our last session, so apologies for that. There is a lot for us to get through, so I anticipate, with everybody's agreement, that we will probably have to run over again, and it'll be nearer 1 o'clock before we conclude our session. I hope that works for witnesses and for members. So can I remind members and our witnesses that this session is focused in the main on budget issues for this and the next financial year. The committee is planning further evidence sessions in the coming weeks on the wider fire service modernisation agenda and proposed station closures. So let me begin by asking our panel an opening question just to get things underway. So I wonder if you can, and I'll come to Stuart Stephen first of all, if you can update us on whether or not you found the funding provision in 2025 to 2026 to have been sufficient, and what are the main asks of your organisation for 2026 to 2027? And if you're unsuccessful in that, what would be the consequences? So, Stuart Stevens.
Thank you, Convener. Is it okay if I just make an opening remarks as well?
I'm sure that if you could just weave that into your answer to my question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Convener and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence on behalf of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and to expand upon our written submission outlining our current challenges and forthcoming budget requirements. We have a very clear vision for S4S to be a leading, sustainable, modern and technologically advanced fire and rescue service that is fit to meet the challenges of Scotland's future. Since our formation in 2013, we have delivered extensive reform, realising the intended benefits of fire reform was also projected to deliver over £900 million in savings by 27-28, significantly exceeding the original expectations of the Police and Fire Reform Act. This has been realised through rationalisation of our corporate estate, control rooms, the streamlining of corporate functions and a reduction of staff across all our staff groups. Within our submission, we've set out our challenges, and whilst these and our financial pressures are real and require attention, let me be clear that this is not a service in crisis. It is a service that has demonstrated resilience, the value of prevention, innovation and a commitment to public safety under challenging circumstances. And the outcomes of this are clear. We have routinely demonstrated the value of a single national service, continuing to respond to and resource every incident, including major incidents, and navigating significant national emergencies such as the COVID pandemic. House fires are now at a record low in Scotland, a reduction of more than a quarter since the inception of the service. Fatal fires are down by 9% since 2013, and non-fatal casualties have reduced by almost a half since 2013, and non-domestic fires are at an all-time low. This success is down to our dedicated staff, both uniformed and support, who every day, selflessly and professionally, work to protect Scotland's communities. What we seek from funding settlements is to ensure that this success continues and is not reversed. Despite this record of delivery and reform, the pressures upon the service are becoming increasingly acute. A real terms reduction of around 18% in our resource budget since 2013, combined with inflationary costs and higher employer national insurance contributions, is constraining our ability to deliver on our strategic priorities. The demands on the service are also changing. Non-fire incidents have increased by around 75% as we take on a wider role supporting public safety and resilience. The effects of climate change, wildfires, flooding and severe weather are now a regular part of our operational reality. And the evidence suggests that these risks will only intensify in the years ahead. Indeed, this year we have seen wildfires increase by 60%, including the largest wildfire ever recorded in Scotland. The impact on our communities, environment, economy, ecology, public health and our services is increasing as a result, and this is driving the need for both change and investment. Risks associated with our geopolitical situation is driving the need for robust civil defence and capabilities to respond to national resilience events and acts of terrorism. Tragic events such as Grenfell and Cameron House must serve as a reminder of the need to ensure our built environment remains safe. Lessons from these inquiries must be actioned, and we require a resourced fire service with a robust focus on regulation, enforcement, prevention and operational preparedness. Whilst our recent additional capital funding has been welcome, pressures remain significant and sustained investment is essential if we are to ensure the resilience of our frontline emergency service and provide safe, modern facilities for our staff and ensure that our critical infrastructure remains fit for purpose. To deliver this, we are seeking capital funding of 61 million in 26-27, rising to 77 million by 29-30. To cover our baseline and unavoidable cost pressures, SFRS requires a resource budget uplift in 26-27 of 30.854 million. An additional 5.7 million would enable us to advance our strategic priorities, such as the use of technology to improve firefighter safety, prevention, digital transformation, cyber security, and investing in our leadership development to support a positive workforce culture. Convener, SFRS has consistently shown that it can reform, deliver efficiencies, adapt to changing needs and do more for the people of Scotland. Our service, along with Police Scotland, has rightly been cited as an exemplar of public service reform, but that must go alongside sustained investment. Investment in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service is not discretionary, it is essential. It's an investment in Scotland's resilience, in the protection of lives and property, and in helping to build a fire and rescue service that is fit for Scotland's future. So if I return to your question, Convener, will expand on the points in terms of the ask at this stage.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Yeah,
and
so
I'll just ask you to be fairly succinct, because we've got a wee bit of limited time and I'm very keen for all members to come in. But yes, that would be helpful.
So as I've covered in my introduction in terms of the 30.84 million, so just to be clear in terms of what that includes, that covers our pay and pension inflation, our non-pay inflation, an increased demand due to climate-related incidents, reinvestment of firefighter posts to achieve our target operating model, address inquiry-led issues such as health and safety-related pressures, and reduce our support staff vacancy back to the agreed level of 3%. The additional 5.7 million would enable us to advance our strategic priorities, and as I touched on, that primarily is around about technology, investment in fire safety and prevention, developing our digital capabilities and cyber security, and developing our workforce as well. What that would mean over the next 3 years would be that we'd be looking to increase our uniformed personnel by 210, and our staff in year 1, 26-27, that would be in the region of 71 uniformed personnel. And our support staff would increase beyond the vacancy factor by 30 over that period. And again, that's been in relation to prevention, compliance, risk, leadership and culture development as well. And where would we invest those firefighter numbers would be to improve our frontline resilience in rural areas, specialist training instructors, prevention and fire safety enforcement, and enhancing our civil contingencies planning and preparedness.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll come back in perhaps with a question with regard to challenges around carrying financial reserves and working with annualised budgets. But in the spirit of time, I'm going to hand straight over to Liam Kerr and then Jamie Hepburn.
I'm very grateful, Convener. Good morning. Chief Officer, your current budget gives you £332 million in resource funding, and you've just said that you need 30.854 million additional in the next budget, which would allow you to do various things that you set out. What extra resource funding do you require to ensure you don't need to reduce firefighter posts to balance the budget?
So the 30.854 million would be what would be required to make sure that we wouldn't have to look at reducing firefighter numbers further. And I say that because we're already starting from a very challenging financial position, and we believe we've removed, over the last 12 years, all the efficiencies that we can drive from the organisation. So there is very little place that we can go to apart from frontline firefighter numbers, given that over 80% of our resource budget is on headcount. And Our corporate services staff are already running with a 10% vacancy factor, so the challenges associated with removing that any further would be significant as well. So that's what we would need in order to deal with our financial pressures and not reduce any further headcount.
Understand. On capital funding then, you've stated that you require, in your submission there, a total capital investment up to 2030-31 of 354 million. And in your submission, you broke that out into various years. If the current 47 million a year of capital funding were to continue, that would leave you £119 million short by 2030-31. What would be the practical result of not getting that investment?
Okay, I'll bring Sarah in to perhaps provide some detail on the capital budget area.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. In terms of the practical realities of not getting that funding, it's very much about the pace that we can change. So our capital budget at 47 million, ideally going up to 61 million, has to cover a broad range of assets. So it covers our estate, of which we have 300 plus properties right across Scotland. It's our fleet, it's our operational equipment that's required to keep firefighters safe and to deliver their service, and it's about our digital and technology. So there's a very broad range of capital infrastructure that has to be funded from that budget. If we were unable to increase it, then we would continue with the kind of position that we have of significant aspects of that asset portfolio not being fit for purpose. So if you take the estate, for example, at this point in time, we have 45% of our estate is in poor or bad condition. 75% of our estate is deemed to be unsuitable in terms of the standards that we require from these buildings. 61% of that estate is more than 30 years old. So that's what we are dealing with, and we're having to spend more resource budget to maintain that estate as we're unable to bring it up to standard. And equally, you know, one of the kind of well-documented challenges within the estate is about rack roofing, as an example. So if we're unable to replace fire stations or repair fire stations where that's possible with such roofing, then we are incurring more ongoing resource costs in order to ensure that these can function safely, not very satisfactorily, but safely. And it also would inhibit our ability to tackle things like contaminant control, so redesigning the footprint within fire stations to make sure that we are providing safe systems of work inside the buildings, and equally some of the work that we know that we need to do to make our buildings more fit for a diverse workforce, so providing the right facilities for all of our staff. So these are some of the examples that we would have to slow down on, not be able to tackle, and we'd have to continue to work as hard as we do at the moment to do the best we can with the limited resources available.
Very grateful. Convener.
Jamie Hepburn, then Sharon Dowie.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's a similar question to that I've asked the last panel and the panel last week as well. What's been the impact on you as a service of the increase in the employer national insurance contributions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr Hepburn. So the total impact of the national insurance changes to the service was 5.5 million. We received 3.42 million support from the Scottish Government, and that obviously left us with a gap of around £2 million. The full cost of that would have resulted in around about 120 firefighter posts being lost, but in terms of the gap of 2 million, that would be 48 firefighters, and would equate to around about 2 whole-time appliances. However, our priority was to protect the front line and not to reduce firefighter numbers in order to address the national insurance gap. But clearly, we had to find the money elsewhere in the organisation to cover that, and that had a detrimental impact primarily on our corporate services, but also a number of our change investment areas within the organisation.
Okay. You have preempted my follow-up question, which would be how many firefighter posts that would equate to, so thank you for getting ahead of me. Convener's quite rightly told us not to go into detail on the service delivery review, which I don't intend to, but you do refer to it in your submission as relates to the budget. So it's just a very quick question on that. You do say the changes would enable you to make savings, which may be true, but certainly my understanding from engaging with the organisation, certainly what we've been told by the Minister for Victims and Community Safety, who presumably has only got this information from you, is that the changes are not driven by the budget, i.e. if you were given an uplift in budget, these would be changes you'd still be looking to make. Is that correct?
Yeah, so just to be clear in terms of the service delivery review, the aim is to invest any savings or resources, people or money, back into the organisation to meet our strategic objectives and priorities. But to be clear, part of the service delivery review also includes the removal of the 10 appliances that happened.
I appreciate I understand. I'm not looking to get into the details, just to understand it's not driven by budgetary concerns per se.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I really wanted to understand on that. And just one final quick question, if I may, Convener, it relates to another part of your submission, which relates to the challenges around recruitment of on-call firefighters, which I think we all understand. And I think I might be asking Sharon Dowie's questions, so I apologise to her. But you say, I'm just going to crack on and ask it. Apologies, Sharon. You do say that there's an additional £4 million being invested annually in revised terms and conditions. I suppose the fundamental question is, well, first of all, is that investment that continues? And is it proving effective?
Yeah, so I'll bring Andy in terms of a little bit of an update in terms of the on-call. But I think when we were here last year, we were still in the process of attempting to harmonise our on-call terms and conditions. And we've successfully done that at the beginning of this year. Along with that, through the National Joint Council, we've also improved retainer fees, and that's been an investment around about £4.5 million into on-call as well. So we've harmonised terms and conditions, and we've made that significant investment into on-call terms and conditions. But I'll bring Andy in terms of that level of improvement.
Thank you. Yeah, just building on Stuart's comments there. So, as you quite rightly say, we have invested that £4 million, and that's come through the harmonisation of the on-call terms and conditions. But what we've also seen this year implemented is a new national contract bandings round about our on-call contracts, both of which have the purpose of increasing contract flexibility, which we know we require from the challenges we see within the on-call and that kind of very rigid historical model we've had. It's probably too early to say that we're seeing any direct benefits at this point in time, and we need that time for that to bed in to truly understand the impact that that's had on the on-call and availability and recruitment and retention. So we will revisit that and review that in due course. There is a number of other areas of work, particularly around about on-call processes, procedures, and on-call appliance availability resilience, if you like, that's been going through on-call improvement team, which supports all of that. But at a high level, I think the harmonisation of the terms and conditions and the new national contract bandings gives us greater flexibility to attract more people into the on-call that can provide different types of availability over different periods of time at different points of the week when we require it most.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was going to move to Sharon Dowie, but I can give you a moment to, since Jamie Hepburn stole your question. So if you're happy to come in, I'll bring you in now, and then I'll bring in Katie Clark.
No, that's fine. You may have already touched on some of it, but I was looking at the position with local on-call firefighters in terms of recruitment and retention. And if you're making further investment, you just said you've made investment of £4 million there. Yeah. Right, so one of the questions, you've lost 1,239 firefighters. I think you've just said that you're going to recruit, with your budget, Ash, you're going to recruit 210 firefighters and 30 civilian staff, is that right?
Yeah.
So is that going to be enough? Because, again, in the submission it says that you're making £900 million in cost savings in total, which is substantially exceeding the £328 million that was envisaged. Right, but we've lost an awful lot of firefighters, and one of the big concerns that especially people in rural communities have is the increase in response times, and that is seen as being a reduction in firefighters because we don't have as many available to be on call to go to fires when needed. So is the investment of 210 staff enough in your budget, given that you've actually lost 1,239?
Yeah, so in terms of the 1,239 figure that's quoted, so just to break that down, that includes around about 550 posts that were as part of the reform process. And that included senior officers and firefighter posts from across the organisation. An additional 166 posts were removed in 2023 due to that significant in-year inflationary pressure that we had to deal with. But there's in the region of around about 300 of those posts are vacancies across the on-call duty system. So, and we are actively trying to recruit into those constantly. But spread across Scotland, you know, across about 356 stations, clearly those numbers are spread across Scotland. So, but recruitment to the on-call always remains a challenge, and it's not a challenge that's unique to Scotland. It's a UK, if not world, challenge that we face. And through our on-call improvement group, through improving terms and conditions, we are attempting to address that. In terms of your question about the rural communities and investment, we think that's investment that could be made. And as I said at the outset, those posts would be targeted to our priorities, but also in terms of improving our resilience, primarily within remote rural communities as well. So essentially, providing whole-time firefighters within cluster approaches in order to improve resilience within rural communities.
So obviously to keep our communities safe, does that mean we maybe need to look at taking on more whole-time firefighters rather than retained firefighters?
So those 210 posts are whole-time firefighters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay, thank you. Katie Clark, followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you. And I was also wanting to ask about response times, because that's one of the issues that FBU Scotland have very much focused on. And call handling times for risk to life have increased by over 20 seconds, and response times to risk to life incidents increased by 1 minute 20 seconds since 2016. And what FBU Scotland are saying to us is that unless there's a better budget settlement, their view is that those response times are only going to continue to rise. Now, that's obviously a massive concern for communities across Scotland. We know, as Sharon has said, there's already been huge numbers of firefighter job losses. It's quite clear the organisation has been attempting to make significant savings, and there's been what, £56 million in real terms cut. So the fat, we presume, has gone. So to what extent is this increase in response times, or the potential for further increase in response times, to what extent is that linked to budgetary issues, to staffing and to other resources such as appliances, which is also a significant issue, the availability of the appropriate appliance for a particular incident?
Okay, I'll bring in in terms of the response times, and I'll probably add something at the end if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Thanks for your question. Yeah, I think the subject of response times is quite a complex matter to try and get into and discuss in full detail. It is influenced by a number of different factors in terms of from the time of call to response of our fire appliances. Part of that is, as you've rightly highlighted, the call handling times, which we've seen increased. We have obviously invested in a new mobilising system for our control rooms. I'm pleased to say that the first go-live date went ahead yesterday at Edinburgh Control successfully, which is a great step forward and been well received within our operations control room. We do see that the implementation of this new mobilising system will streamline the call handling significantly, and we'll hopefully see that positive impact on the response times as a result of that. That's one factor of that. As are a number of many factors. I think it's fair to say that we do need to do more work to fully understand what the factors are that are involved in the response times, to better understand where we can make efficiencies, where we can make things better. And we're looking to potentially commission some work round about that from academic research to help us understand that and work with the Fire Brigade Union on that. So I think there is a number of factors within that. It's not solely down to just the number of personnel we have in terms of appliances. It's multi-factored within that. So we need to do more work, more comprehensive work, to totally understand the full picture on that and what's impacting on it, to then put solutions in place to try and reduce that. I think what I would say in terms of any concerns around community risk is that I think it's important to note that over that period of time, what we've seen the response times increase, we've actually received improved outcomes within the figures that Stuart's spoken about in terms of accidental dwelling fires, fire casualties, etc. So I think that's testament to the hard work of our prevention team and firefighters across the country, and we're absolutely focused on outcomes for community, but absolutely acknowledge that we need to understand more around about response times and the impact they have.
And all I would add, I think Andy's kind of touched on this, that there's obviously 3 elements to response times in terms of call handling, time to mobilise and the time to arrive at the incident. But for us, there's also that 4th point, and that's the point where a fire starts and it's discovered. So the amount of work that the service has done over the last 20 years in terms of the Home Fire Safety Visit programme, allied with new legislation in terms of smoke detection and standards, is helping to drive that down and make sure that outcomes don't reverse. But clearly with firefighters, you get 2 for 1. You get a response and you also get a prevention element to that as well. So the volume of community safety, home safety that we do is helping to control those outcomes and mitigate the kind of response time element as well. So I think it's really important that we highlight that.
If it's okay, just a brief follow-up. And I have discussed with you response times previously outside the context of the committee, and I understand that the statistic itself is when the first appliance gets there, and sometimes it may be that it's not possible to deal with the incident until there's a number of appliances and the right skill set there. So I appreciate response time itself is just a statistic, but it is indicative of something wider. And we're going to be looking, as you know, at the proposals that are coming through the review that's currently taking place, which may well propose quite significant changes to the service, in particular the closure of stations, which is a cause of concern in many communities. So will this work on response times be available before decisions are taken in terms of, particularly fire stations, because we need to understand how we make sure we have the resource in place to ensure that there isn't an increase in resource in response times and that it doesn't impact on safety. Is that work going to be completed in time, would you say?
I think that's a bigger piece of work, and I would say that bigger piece of work is for all stations, not just those included within the SDR options for change. The response times that we have shared as part of the consultation and the work done through the Community Risk Index Modelling team, the CRIM team, is based on the current factors that influence that. So the response times that we have stated through the consultation at the moment are current, they're relevant at the moment. But clearly, as you have rightly said, looking at trends, we need to understand more. So I think the piece of work around about response times is for the whole service and not necessarily just for the SDR options for change. So we are content with what we've done in response times and that we have shared through the public consultation at this point, but acknowledge that the increase in response times over a longer period of time needs a bigger piece of work for the entirety of the service. So I think that's important. And I think just in Stuart's point, just touching on the prevention element of that as well, I think if you look back round about that and the increase we're now seeing, as Stuart's rightly said, round about climate change, I think that's another factor that plays into the response times in terms of we are seeing more periods of time where we would be classed in spate conditions, which is a high volume of calls for flooding, for wildfire, bonfire night. So we're seeing an increase in that. And due to the way we respond in terms of the weight of response, that will impact response times naturally, because we're putting a large degree of resource to these incidents, which then means your business as usual, you're having to cover your other appliances. So there's a number of different factors within that. It's not, as I say, not purely just down to two numbers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Rhona Mackay, then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, panel. Katie Clark's questions kind of leads into my own, which was really about Stuart Stevens, your opening statement. You mentioned wildfires and the impact of climate change and everything that goes with it. So it was just to see if you could kind of say a bit more about that impact, the changing demands on the service, and what does that really mean for resources? You know, I mean, does it offset the drop in, for instance, the welcome drop in house fires, the fact that you're having to do that? So if you could maybe just talk us through that.
Yeah, I think in terms of wildfires and the kind of broader climate change incidents that we're seeing, it is a fact that they are becoming more severe and more frequent. And that is really driving the need for change within the organisation to make sure that we have the right resources in the right place to respond to that. But it also comes with an increased demand in terms of equipment, infrastructure and training that we need to provide to our firefighters to respond to that. So part of our SDR process and part of the work we're doing to change the organisation, and obviously part of the investment, is directly to respond to that. So we've made a significant investment in terms of flood and water rescue and wildfire equipment. That's all now live, but we need to build upon that because we are seeing those incidents increase. And perhaps just to put into context in terms of the impact that has had on the organisation this year. So not only have we seen a 60% increase and the biggest wildfire in Scotland, that has come at a financial cost to the organisation, because many of these incidents happen in primarily remote rural areas that require our on-call staff to respond. And they do so fantastically. And they can be there for quite a prolonged period of time, and that comes at a financial cost to the organisation. So this year alone, through climate-driven demand, we have overspent by about 1.3 million on staff costs, primarily attributed to the on-call and wildfire response. And there's also things like fuel, etc., that's added onto that. So the challenge is real, and it's becoming increasingly more significant. And if you look at any research, and we're heavily involved with Scottish Wildfire Forum and beyond in terms of other countries, the predictions are that it will become increasingly challenging over the next few years. And what my role here is to do is to make sure that the service and communities are appropriately prepared to deal with wildfires and other significant incidents. So that is part of the reason why we need to really drive the organisational change. And some of the statistics, and you mentioned, so yes, there is a reduction in some elements of our activity, but that has been compensated for by increases in...
Been offset.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, that requires a much more skilled workforce and the training in order to deliver that as well. So,
so, I mean, I guess the nature of wildfires is that they will happen more often in rural areas. And, I mean, what are the challenges there? Because I know that even without wildfires, rural services can be stretched. So how are you forward planning for that sort of thing? Yeah,
so I mean, that's probably the crux of this service delivery review and the areas of investment is forward planning to make sure that we've got adequate resources in those places. But in terms of predicting those things, we're doing a lot of work with organisations to be better at being able to predict where wildfires will happen. We've become very good at that over the last few years, working with partners so we can deploy resources ahead of time to deal with that. But it is putting a huge pressure on our rural firefighters and capabilities. So we need to support them with that, both through equipment, training and additional personnel.
And you mentioned training. So is that now just standard training to cope with these sort of climate events for your recruits? No, so we've got specialist teams and we've invested heavily in training with those. We have sent people to Spain, for example, to become tactical advisors. So we're really enhancing that. We work with landowners and people with land management in order to train us in terms of some very specialist techniques to deal with wildfires as well. So we're really taking that forward. But we recognise there's much more needed to be done. And is that financially resourceful, intense to have to do all that?
It is indeed, and part of our submission for this year, and I talked about investment in training instructors, is exactly to deal with that. Given the type of service that we are and the scale of the service, we believe that we could be a wildfire centre of excellence, and people could send people here to be trained, given what the exposure that we could have. So that is part of our submission, is to really try and build the organisation and change the organisation in order to meet that specialist demand. All I would say in terms of so obviously that's additional training, and we've seen real positives in terms of fire activity. But that doesn't mean that fires don't occur. And we need to make sure that our firefighters are still appropriately trained and equipped to deal with fires, because they might not get as level of experiential learning that they might want to have had. But we need to make sure that we compensate for that through realistic frequent training. And again, that's part of our submission, is to make sure that we can provide that. So it's a good news story around about fires coming down, but they still happen, and we need to make sure that our crews are prepared.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Pauline McNeill, then Fulton McGregor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Not to go into the detail of the options for change at the moment, and you've put that on hold anyway, but I did want to ask you, in terms of your budget asks, will it have any impact on the proposed list of potential closures? You know, if you get what you want, will it give you more money to look at the list of fire stations that you're considering to close?
Yeah, the decision to take more time before we make any forward decisions, I think we really understand the nature of this type of change, and throughout we've been really clear and committed to listening to communities and being very transparent around about the process and ensuring that no decisions had been made, and I can categorically state that that is the case. In terms of the budget implications, clearly every year we need to think carefully around about what the budget implications would be, and any additional budget we would follow the same principles that we are using for SDR to invest in line with our strategic priorities and areas of the organisation. So I guess from a negative budget position, what we've proposed through SDR would pale in insignificance in terms of the changes that we would need to make. So perhaps to come back to Mr Kerr's earlier question, the implications of flat cash, for example, in the organisation would be significant. So we would be, just in terms of numbers, we would be flat cash, for context, would equate to around about 720 whole-time firefighter posts, which would be about approximately 30 whole-time fire appliances. And that would be on top of the 10 appliances that we've currently withdrawn. So that would equate to around about 886 less whole-time firefighters in Scotland and around about 40 appliances. That equates to a third of the whole-time fire appliances in Scotland. And probably just to illustrate the magnitude of that, that would equate to every whole-time fire appliance in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen having to be removed. And clearly we would do that pan Scotland, but that just shows you the magnitude of the challenge we would face from a flat cash settlement.
But the budget that you've asked for to manage, so we've yet to find out if the government will concede that. I'm trying to, will it have any impact on the current options for change?
The options for change we look at the moment is through the lens of risk and demand, and clearly it's incumbent on me to ensure that as a public body we are continually to review where our resources are allocated. So we would follow that same methodology in terms of if additional budget was provided, but I can't categorically state that it would change the outcomes because we have not made any decisions at this point anyway.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I understand what you're saying, to be honest. I don't want to get into the detail. I'm a Glasgow member and there's two major fire stations earmarked for closure, either of which is a massive problem for Glasgow. What I'm trying to work out is, surely in your strategic review and everything else, if you need to ask for a budget that might give you scope not to have to make those decisions. Or is there no relationship between the budget asks and these potential closures?
No, there's no relationship between the budget ask and what's been proposed through SDR. SDR process was already underway, so there's no relationship between that and the budget. What we're doing is rightly reviewing where our resources are. And to use the Glasgow example, questioning ourselves, do we require to build 2 new fire stations in Glasgow, or is there an option where we could build one and reinvest that additional capital money that would release into other parts of the organisation, which in line with what Sarah said, we have some critical challenges across our estate, so we would use that money for that. So that is the question that we're proposing at the moment.
Right, so this will sit almost independently from what the outcome of the budget?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Can I ask you about the programme of decontamination? So you've said quite a lot about capitals, the state of the estate. There's obviously quite a bit of interest of MSPs about the rolling programme for decontamination facilities. What can you say about the progress on that could be made if you got this, or your capital ask?
Yeah, I'll bring Andy in, and who will provide an update in terms of progress we've made and where we'd like to go to in terms of the future as well.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, as you, the matter of contamination is a priority for the service, so we have recently invested £3.2 million in additional PPE and contaminants infrastructure to support the implementation of our contaminant standard operating procedure that's based on the work done by the FPU and Professor Anna Steck, and we've worked with the FPU in developing and implementing that standard operating procedure. So there's a significant amount of work and investment going in over the last couple of years to get us to this point, which saw that standard operating procedure implemented at the start of this calendar year. I think it's important to say there's probably two strands in terms of our approach to contaminants. One is absolutely around about capital investment and resource investment to help support the implementation of that and make improvements within our contaminant arrangements, and the capital backlog is part of that, as we know, but also quite a significant element of our focus is around about human behaviours and culture and attitudes and policies, procedures that we can actually take actions now that don't cost us money at this point. Post-incident actions and arrangements that we've put in place through our standard operating procedure, and we are now starting to see a change in culture in the service around about contaminants. It's much more considered, and our staff adhering to the standard operating procedure, so that's a real positive step forward. We know that in our estate we have challenges, which has been well documented over a long period of time. But what the approach that we've taken with contaminants is that we apply the highest level of control measures and mitigation possible to every station that we have, depending on the configuration of that station, the duty system, the activity level, the type of activity they attend, and it's really on a risk-based approach. So there has been a significant amount of work, investment and capital around about station zoning procedures to keep people safe, investment in decon equipment that's been made available to the market, for example, a BA set washing machine that we've invested in for to trial at the moment, and we're continually looking at research that's coming to the fore on contaminants. So I think in terms of your question, as we will require ongoing capital and resource investment to allow us to address the capital backlog that will help to get us to a point where we need to get to with the contaminants, but also resource funding to look at research, new technologies that come on board, and solutions that will help us keep firefighters safe and mitigate the effects of contaminants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I bring in Fulton McGregor, I wonder if I can just come back to the question that I indicated I would ask, going back to budget, and specifically with regard to some of the information that you shared in your submission that set out the impact of the service being unable to carry financial reserves, working with an annualised budget process, which we've covered a fair bit in the committee, and not being able to exercise borrowing powers without ministerial approval. So, interested in whether or not these are issues that you've had an opportunity to discuss with the Scottish Government, and do you see any possible movement on this, given the considerable financial constraints and pressures that your service is under at the moment?
Yeah, I might bring Sarah in terms of a bit more detail, but in terms of your question around about, has it been discussions that we've had with the Scottish Government? Yes, it's part of the Scottish Spending Review conversations. We have highlighted that, but to be truthful, that is a conversation that we've had numerous times over the period of the service, and have pushed for the ability to hold reserves, particularly in terms of our capital spend, because whilst we have a 3-year capital programme, we have a 1-year capital budget. So when you're developing long-term capital spends, building new fire stations that take multiple years, it can be very, very challenging in terms of how you phase that over the years. So we would really welcome the ability to hold reserves, particularly from a capital perspective between each year.
Yeah, I think Stuart has probably largely covered it, but I guess just back pre-reform, that was something we had the luxury of being able to do, as we were part of kind of local government funding. So we had access to borrowing, we had access to reserves. So that's something we've had to get used to. Coming into being the National Service. So it does put a strain on those managing budgets, and when things happen mid-year, we certainly have to work particularly hard to make sure that we are able to, for example, on the capital budget, fully spend the budget. So we have to have projects ready to bring forward from future years of our kind of multi-year capital plan, so that we can, as I say, spend the money, make best use of it. And I'm pleased to say that's something we have consistently done, so we have been able to get that investment into the service. But it's more challenging than it certainly would be if we had these other financial levers at our disposal.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I'll bring in Fulton McGregor now.
Thanks, Convener. Good afternoon, panel. I was actually going to come in on the question that Pauline McNeill explored. I think that's kind of been covered around about the harmful fire contaminants, because that's such an issue I've had some constituent contact about as well. But on that theme of fire officer safety, and in the spirit that Jamie Hepburn and Pauline McNeill have already said about the review, so not to go into the review, but I do know that some people have raised concerns about fire officer safety if the review goes through, and I know that no decision's been made on that. But is there anything that you're doing as a service around about fire officer safety generally? And is there anything in the review that puts that at risk, financially speaking, in a kind of budget capacity?
I'll bring Andy to talk around about some of the work we've done in terms of safety, the safety culture and training and where we are. I think just to pick up the point from SDR, and I think I said this publicly when it was launched, that my focus will always be ensuring that we ensure the safety of communities and my firefighters. So any decisions we make, I need to be absolutely assured that will not be impacted. And I'm sure you can understand the reasons why. We recognise the significance of these changes and the importance of getting it right, and hence why we're taking some more time to make sure that we do that, because this cannot be rushed. But in terms of specifics around about fire officer safety, I'll bring Andy to give an update.
Yeah, no, thanks for your question. Just in terms of training in general around about firefighter safety, so there's been significant progress and improvement in that area over the past couple of years. A lot of that stemming from recommendations from a number of different audits from HMFSI, the Firestorm report with FBU, but also the impact we had of the COVID-19 pandemic and our ability to train people around about social distancing protocols that really created a bit of a backlog for us within training. So over the last couple of years, there's been a significant amount of work done on that, and we've now got ourselves back to where we need to in terms of core training, competency and currency. It's been a significant piece of work and a lot of effort from the training department itself. I think, again, touching back on Stuart's point, what I would say is that working capacity that's been required to do that is not sustainable going forward in a business as usual model, and investment is required within training to allow us to move to a business as usual model for training, on core training for firefighter safety moving forward. Stuart's kind of touched on it as well. I think we're seeing quite positively a reduction in terms of the number of fires we attend, quite significantly over a number of decades, but certainly since we became a single service. Therefore, firefighters are getting less opportunities to get that experiential learning in fires, but also due to pension remedy changes over the last few years as well, we've had a high number of experienced firefighters leave the service, so therefore have a higher percentage of firefighters in development or early in service. So I can't stress enough the importance that we need to ensure that we are enhancing and investing and improving our training and firefighter safety to ultimately make communities safer. There has been significant investment within the training department as well from capital funding. I think over the last, or within this current 3-year capital plan, we've got a £6 million commitment to training facilities, and we're currently in year 1 of that. And we've seen investment in 8 of our breathing apparatus training sites across the entirety of the service. So Invergordon, Sunborough, Kirkwall, Stornoway, Oban, Dreghorn, Dumfries and the National Training Centre have all seen upgrades this year to their BA training facilities. So there is significant focus and investment going into training at the moment. But again, I just stress that that's improving firefighter safety, but more needs to be done, particularly when you consider emerging risks such as climate change that we need to train for in the future.
Could I just briefly add a point as well, please? And the opening statement also talked around about our desire to be much more technologically advanced. So we've rolled out digital fireground radios to the whole organisation. We've invested more in PPE, and we're currently commencing a project to roll out new breathing apparatus sets at quite a considerable cost across the organisation, with our intention to provide the best for our firefighters. Alongside that, through the Scottish Government CivTech process, we won 2 bids through that. One is around about situational awareness, so technology on the fireground to strengthen safety on the fireground, and the other is around about decontamination. So working with Professor Arastek, who's done the research on behalf of the Fire Brigades Union, in partnership with her, we're developing wearable technology and biometric screening to monitor the impacts of contamination on firefighters and to make sure that we can put in place those control measures, because firefighter safety is absolutely a priority for our organisation, and we'll use technology in whatever our means, including better training, to make sure that we ensure that.
Thanks for that. Thanks for those substantial answers. Just one final question then, and that is around about in your submission you mentioned the expansion of the firefighters' role, and I'm just wondering if you've got any update on this, generally speaking, and the Community Resilience Hub pilot.
Yeah, I'll maybe bring Sarah to comment on the community resilience. In terms of the expansion of the role, I absolutely believe that the fire service can do more for the communities of Scotland. We've got an exceptional prevention record, and we could apply that across the public sector more broadly. Equally, I think we could also take pressures off other organisations in terms of things like emergency medical response and response to terrorism. So that business case has not been funded, but it still remains our ambitions to progress that and do more for communities, as I say. But I'll bring Sarah in terms of community resilience hubs.
Yeah, thank you. Community Resilience Hub business case, again, was well received but has not been funded in full. However, we are taking forward a pilot project at Portree within our existing capital programme. So our intention would be to take that forward, get the learning points from that, and then work towards making the case in future around how we can deploy these community resilience hubs further. And it plays to some of the work that we've already done in terms of working with partners to share estate. We've got a number of properties across Scotland shared with both emergency service partners and others. So we're really keen to develop that shared estate and using that model in particular, which has environmental benefits as well.
Okay, thanks. The convener's let me in with one final question, I think. Is that nod? Okay. I was just checking. I didn't want to go on the wrong side of the convener. Well, it's totally off track, but it's came up while I was while the answers were coming in there. There's actually been a specific situation in my constituency recently that I raised in the chamber last week. You'll probably have heard about it, because I think it's quite rare. A rare situation, and it's an old coal fire that's been burning in Coatbridge. Actually, the force had quite a large presence at that in the early days of it, before it was taken over by North Lanarkshire Council, which would have been a significant impact on you. How do you plan for these emergency situations? Because nobody's seen that was coming. We believe it's one of the only ones ever to have happened in Scotland. I think there's been 2 in Wales previously. So it's a completely unique set of circumstances. How do you plan for these sort of things? Is it similar to, say, the wildfires? Or because you did have a large presence there for about a week, I would say, which would have been a significant resource.
Yeah, I think the nature of that incident you're talking about, it's a kind of deep-seated fire, obviously, in the pit. It's a very much a protracted incident. It's not necessarily about the speed of response, but weight of response. And I think the fact that we've got the ability to pull resources from across the country now, not bound by legacy service boundaries, if you like, to resource that. So we have been resourcing that over the period of time, not just from the immediately local stations, but in the surrounding area to support that. And I know the local senior officers certainly tied in very closely with the local authority and others in terms of trying to get to a point of resolution on it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can come in with a final question, and then I'll maybe ask the same question I asked the previous panel, just with regard to some maybe written follow-up regarding climate change. But firstly, you may have heard us discuss with panel 1 the issues around cyber threat, and you do mention that in your submission, and obviously the implications for public sector organisations being targeted are obvious. So I'm just interested in maybe a little bit more from you on what you're doing within Scottish Fire and Rescue just to mitigate against that threat at the moment.
Sarah and Crusaders done quite considerable work with the team on this, but just in terms of the severity that we view that risk, that is, I think, top of our risk register at the moment in terms of that threat. But I'll bring Sarah to talk about what we're doing.
Yep, thank you. So that was my first point. We've got that very clearly highlighted on our risk register, and it's certainly one that is regularly scrutinised and discussed through our board and committees. And I believe there's a risk spotlight coming at the next meeting of our Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. So just to give you a bit of assurance that it's very much in the corporate sites. We also have had an internal audit on cyber security recently. They've given us a very thorough review in terms of a maturity model, so we're now working carefully through an action plan to implement the actions that have been identified from that. We're also very mindful of the need to ensure that we are able to respond effectively, and we're working on that particular element as well. And similarly, we've done a recent review of the structure within our digital and technology services, so ensuring that they are set up in the best way possible in order to be able to resource the work that needs to be done on cyber, recognising that as one of their key priorities. But that's an example, perhaps, of where the vacancy factor issue kicks in for us. We've undertaken that work. We've got an excellent structure now in place. We're being quite successful in recruiting into that structure, and now we're finding challenges in terms of that vacancy factor to be able to afford all of the posts that are in there. So that's where we need to do a bit of work just to make sure that, and we've got that within our submission, to make sure that we can address that vacancy factor issue and resource posts like these that are really critical to ensure our cyber security as we move forward.
Okay, thank you for that very helpful answer. And I think just before we conclude, I'll maybe offer the same invitation to you that I did the first panel with regard to what your organisation is doing just to mitigate carbon emissions and to reduce carbon emissions, obviously, as we're looking to meet our climate change targets across Scotland. So very much more an organisational rather than an operational response, but we'd be very keen to hear a little bit about what you're doing as a service around that. Okay, so if there are no more questions, can I thank you all for your attendance today? I think that's been a really helpful session. That now concludes the public part of our meeting, and we'll now move into private session. Thank you. Thank you.